Not that we are judgmental in any way. All right, so welcome everybody. Here we are, week 6. Yes.
Moving on.
Moving forward, getting her done. So, questions, comments, concerns, curiosities. Okay, all right, well, this week we're going to talk about communication, okay, and hopefully move into a little bit of leadership, and then probably won't finish. That's such a huge topic too, and we may finish that next week as we move forward. So we'll see how far we get. I have a fun thing for you guys to do, and I have some really great video stuff that goes with it, which is at home, but we can still have fun, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about communication. Before we get started, just to get us going. Here's a definition. This is from a different source, but most of the sources will have something very similar to this. So it's a process, right, by which a person, group, or organization, the sender, transmits some type of information, the message, to another person, group, or organization, the receiver, right? That just seems pretty obvious. What is interesting is send, message, receive. Seems very straightforward. And yet this is one of the things that is the most difficult things to do well, particularly in organizations. Yeah. So why is that, right? Well, we all see our, and hear and use all of our senses to interpret messages based on us. So we all have our little lenses through which we look, and that is colored by our experiences, our belief systems, all of that, our personalities, our emotions, how we're feeling. So it gets really, really complicated. The other thing is we tend to assume that everybody is seeing things the way we do. That's our biggest problem, right? So here it is. Here's our steps. Here are our steps. So before we actually send a message, we have to put it in some sort of form. So if I'm talking to my 4-year-old granddaughter, I'm going to put it in a different form than if I'm talking to a faculty member here, right? So we're going to encode this message in whatever form we think is the best. And then we're going to put it in some sort of transmission mode. So whether we write it, draw it, speak it, role play, act out, whatever. However, we are going to send that message. So body language is a way to send a message, right? Then the receiver gets this message. They have to decode it. And again, they're using a different set of experiences and background and personality to do that. And then they have received a message. Now, the message that's sent and the message that's received, how often are these that close? Kind of depends, right? So if it's a fairly straightforward communication, then chances are it is fairly similar. If it has some complexities, then that's where we get into some trouble. So one of the things that we can do is signal after we receive the message, what we received. And we do that through feedback. But either, one thing often that you're told is repeat back what someone has told you. So particularly, I like this as an employee, which is to say, okay, just to summarize before, to make sure I'm on the same page, you want me to do X, Y, Z. No. I want you to do A, B, C. Oh, okay. So anyway, that's a good thing to always do. So you have that constant loop. So I like this diagram. I use it in a number of different places because you see here in the middle, we have what we just talked about, right? The process that we're going through with the feedback loop. But then you'll notice there are these noise things coming in. So noise can be anything that distracts you. So it can be the sounds that we just heard down the hall, right? It could be your phone buzzing at you. It could be a thought that interrupts your thinking process, like, oh crap, I forgot to turn the stove off before I left, whatever. So, but typically we're surrounded by a lot of sensory overload and sensory interruptions. And subconsciously, we filter out a lot of that. And we decide what we're going to listen to and what we're not going to listen to. So, like, there's a lot of noise down the hall, which I'm guessing most of you have filtered out. But if somebody screamed fire, you would probably immediately tune in. So, or active shooter. Okay, so these are types of communication. Notice, nonverbal communication is where it's at. So this is what I love about people that I've worked with, where they will say something nice, but they say it in a really nasty tone. And with body language, they'll let you know, right? So then, if you call them out or complain about it, they're like, this is exactly what I said. How can that be bad, right? And so, of course, if you try to bring in a third party, right, there you are. But, and, so I mentioned, facial, your body language, but we use facial expressions a lot. And when you think about when parents begin, when babies and toddlers are learning language, a lot of it is visual, right? And they're watching expressions. And there was an example one day when my son was really little. He was a preschooler, but I was doing our taxes and I did not like when I pushed the button what the answer was that I got, right? And I was all scowly and everything. And he came in and he got all teary and he's like, he thought he'd done something wrong because of the way I was looking, right? Of course, it had nothing to do with it. We also see that at work. Sometimes people are inside themselves and they're frowning. And if you go by and let's say, Chris says, hi, how are you? And I'm frowning. What does that tell him? Not that I'm having a bad day. I don't like him. I'm antisocial, maybe, whatever. So facial expression is very important. Also gestures, right? Whether you're inclusive or exclusive, although sometimes we're just cold. Eye contact, and this can be very cultural too, all of these. Because in some cultures, looking eye to eye is a sign of disrespect. So you deflect down. You don't look at the other person. The other thing is eye contact has a time frame. Ooh, you're really good. You are not blinking.
Neither are you.
I know. Well, mine's on purpose. Most people, after a couple of seconds, usually around 3 seconds, will look away. It's really creepy, when somebody is just staring at you. And I get that in presentations. It's weird, right? I get that on presentations where I'm sitting in the back of the room and the students are up here. And since I'm doing the grading, they're talking only to me. And they're making constant eye contact with me. And I keep telling them, this is really creepy, you guys, stop doing this. Okay. So I often will look down to get away from it. We also telegraph things like our expertise, right, in the way we dress. So for instance, when you go to a clinic, if you see somebody in scrubs, you're going to assume they're a medical person. If you see somebody in a business suit, you probably don't want them to draw your blood, right? I mean, these are just assumptions that we make. Also space. So if I'm interviewing and I'm sitting across the table with you and you're in an uncomfortable chair, that tells you something, as opposed to you walk in and we sit at a round table and I'm offering water, coffee or whatever, right? So time is another thing. I don't think it is up there. So where people make you wait to show that they're in a position of power and authority, right? So all of these things get bundled up with the actual message itself and interpretation. Okay, so this is an older study and from an older source, but I'm curious what you guys think. So Deborah Tan, who's a sociolinguist, did a huge study a few years ago, looking at how men and women tend to communicate, okay? So when asked and observed, men tend to use the I word, like if you're in a job interview, and this is from an anecdotal standpoint, I've noticed this as well when I'm interviewing people. You know, it's, well, I did this and I've accomplished that, and I was asked to do this and blah, blah, blah. Not necessarily in a boastful way, just stating the facts. Women tend to downplay their status. They're a little bit less comfortable with it culturally. And so they will often use the we word, even when they're the only one, right? We in the team. So you can see some of the others on here. When asked, oh, whoops, I left a quotation mark off. Sorry about that. When men and women were asked what their biggest gripe was of the other sex, women said that men don't listen, and men said that women were too emotional.
Did you say something?
That's to say. They want you to hear what I'm saying. Repeat back to me, right?
They don't like it when I tell them, yes, I heard what you said, I just didn't care.
So I get this a lot because I'm an external processor, right? So I brainstorm by talking. And at some point, people just tune me off. Yeah. So I've learned to say, okay, wait a minute. You have to pay attention now. At 4 o'clock, you need to pick up the kids and do this and do that. Okay, you can go back to ignoring me. And then I verbally process, and I'm okay with that. Because I don't want anybody to step in and fix me. I just want to vent and brainstorm, right? So it depends on who you are. So do you guys think that in today's world, there really are differences in how people communicate based on their gender? Or do you think it's changed?
It depends on your upbringing, you know.
Interesting, yes. Even here in our country, we have subcultures, right? And in our generations, we have different subcultures, right? So my generation probably communicates much differently than, say, Generation Z does. And that includes interacting with one another. So what did she find in her studies? And this has been also is similar to other studies, that they, as Ben said, we tend to communicate differently if we have learned different ways of communication. And how do we learn that? Well, it starts in the home, where we identify with a similar parent or brother, sister, or caregiver, somebody that we identify with, right? And that these things came through, but that the differences were actually very minimal. They were very slight. And I think that if we had conducted this survey when I was, say, 25, I think it would be broader. But I feel like now, you know, like, I don't know about you guys, but when I was younger, I didn't have a female boss. They were all men. Now, right? A lot of women in management. Okay. One thing an organization should be aware of are gossip and rumors. So, you know, rumors in particular are something that you probably want to avoid. And the reason they get started is in the absence of knowledge, people who are concerned, afraid, will make up something to explain what's going on. So if you see a lot of corporate people coming into your plant or your office, and all these suits keep coming in and out, in and out, in and out, and your bosses look really stressed and uncomfortable, but you don't know what's going on, you know, what could be going on? What's your first thought? What would affect you the most? Layoff or shutdown. And so you might immediately go there because that's your biggest fear. but it could just be something innocuous, right? I mean, we don't know. So I'm a believer in sharing information unless it's really proprietary or, you know, at a level that shouldn't be shared, right? But just regular, keeping people in the loop can be really, really helpful. And so our medical clinic, the senior physician was close to retirement, and none of the junior physicians wanted to take over. It's privately owned, wanted to take it over. And so it was very successful. And so we were looking to merge or find another entity to buy us out so that people could keep their job. We didn't have to close, right? Well, this was very concerning to the staff, very concerning. So we had weekly Friday morning gatherings, you know, just kind of informal. People would drop in for coffee before patients started flowing in. And then as we found somebody, I brought them in, and I had one of their members who was part of the transition team. I gave her a spot to work in our lunchroom. And so the people could just wander in and out and ask her questions. And she was very accessible. And then I put out a question box because, you know, some people are still shy. They're afraid to ask because what if this is their new boss and she thinks their question is stupid or angry? So I put a question box where you could put in an anonymous question. And then next time we had our Friday morning meetings, we would address it. And that worked pretty well. Even still, there was a lot of anxiety. So it's really important to manage that. So think about, again, if we go back to children, you know, the monster they imagine under the bed or in the closet is never as bad as their imagination. Okay, it's usually something rattling around or a cat or pet or something, the sound that they hear. But in the absence of knowledge and fear takes over, they imagine the worst. So I suggest tamping down on rumors by providing good communication and openness. The grapevine, are you guys familiar with this? So you will often have people within your organization or your department or your team that are portray themselves as knowledgeable. So maybe it's like an assistant to somebody who hears a lot of stuff going on, and they will share it out with the rest of the people. Of course, they don't have all the information. So what they're sharing can end up being part gossip, part rumor, part whatever. But the grapevine is so fast and furious. Workers will often listen to a trusted coworker that they think has special knowledge, even if they don't, over something that the boss might say directly, right? It's kind of like during the dot-com era when all these startups were happening and people would not, you know, they listen to, you know, financial advisor would say, this is really dangerous, don't do this. Here's where you want to invest, blah, blah, blah. Somebody would get in a cab and ask the taxi driver who had driven around some sort of investment person and say, oh, I heard so-and-so talking and this is where you want to put your money. And people will believe that, right? Over somebody that does this for a living. So it's a weird thing, you know, that we're very skeptical of traditional authority or sources of information. I have actually used the grapevine to get information out because it's fast and furious. So during this time period of transition for the clinic, and I was also leaving, which was very disruptive to them because I'd been there a long time. I said to our key person of the grapevine, she was in my office, and I was on the phone, I hung up and I said, oh, so I said, I'm sorry, you may have overheard some of that. So we're not really ready to share it with the staff yet, but everybody's getting a large salary increase. Everybody knew it was going to be seconds. science. But I wanted them to know. So I planted that, right? And it came true. So she looked like, whoa, she was super knowledgeable and it was great for her, but it was really good for me. So you can use it. Yes, it's a dangerous thing to do. So I still prefer direct, transparent, and appropriate, respectful communication. So, yeah. Anyway, comments, stories, questions. I'm sure you guys have seen it. Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how to put in my 2 weeks notice one time, or it was about a month away.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't figure out who to tell without it going through the grapevine before I could get around.
Right.
So
That's a hard one. Yes. And sometimes your supervisors are the biggest leaks. I mean, and yeah. Of course, they're not supervisors because they have great management skills. They're either good widget makers or they were the next person. They happen to be handy and they got thrown in or whatever, or they sought out power. Yeah. And did you figure it out or?
yeah, I just told my direct supervisor and let him, before I knew it, I was walking around, people were talking to me about it. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah, even in large organizations, right? It just, yeah, you probably see that where you are.
My favorite one happened here a few weeks ago. Before we had a large pay increase to help try and retain staff. And we had an ex-engineer who left and went to another company tell a guy in our organization that someone was leaving, the plant manager was leaving and someone that no one likes was taking his place. To try and get that person to leave and go to the other plant.
Oh my God.
Other company was trying to get them, knock them out of our company, and people are being murderous right now about getting.
I guess.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, they tried to. So I thought that was really funny. So he came to me, is this true? Is this true? And I said, you know what, I'll ask. And I actually emailed the vice president of our division and asked him, he says, no. Just checking.
Wow. Well, and sometimes too with skilled trades, it's right now it's really frenetic, right?
Yeah.
Finding people and that kind of thing. Okay, so I think we're gonna set this aside until next week. I have a little cross-cultural game that's kind of fun to play. But I'm gonna hope that we have at least one more person because it's better if we have two teams. But the thing to remember here again earlier is that even within our own small circle, our own little world, we all have different backgrounds and have different cultures and belief systems. So when you begin to move geographically into other very different cultures and languages, that just gets exponentially magnified. Okay, so we're going to stop here and I'm going to take this down. So, okay, good. All right. So I have something for you guys to do. Okay. Sorry, I have props in here as well. I know. Is that a good teaser?
Props. I think it's good to have more problems.
Okay.
It depends what kind.
True, for me, not for you guys. There will be no dancing on the tables or singing involved unless you choose to do that, I guess, okay? All right, so I'm gonna present to you something. You've probably done this maybe in some other classes where you identify it by your style of communication, okay? And I mentioned this briefly last week, but this comes from a friend of mine who has a consulting firm that she's adopted this and developed it. So it is proprietary, but I'm also somebody that is trained to do this by her. So I have her permission. It's just that I can't put it out there for everybody because normally people pay to do this, okay? So
We are.
True. Well, it also comes with a book that explains a lot more in detail, but we're just doing a smaller rendition of it, okay? So you're gonna get this sheet of paper that has a whole crap load, a whole bunch of adjectives to describe people. So what I want you to do is just put a check mark by ones as you go through, and I have writing instruments if you need them. So you put a check mark by whatever is really you. So when you look at this, you're like, oh yeah. Or people tell me this all the time, even if you disagree. If you're not sure, don't check it, okay? And then when you're done, we'll do some scoring and we'll be able to figure out. Now, one thing I've noticed, done it a couple of times at Oregon Tech, and I tend to get similar communication types depending on the class I'm teaching. So if I have a bunch of people in just one major, then they tend to have some similarities, but it'll be interesting in this class to see what we come up with. So I'm going to stop talking and let you do that. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. I need to pause. All right, so let's see where we are. So you've counted up your adjectives. And you can see these are your colors. So the letter that you have the most adjectives in will be your more dominant color, okay? Now, some of you will have a very dominant one. You might have two dominant. You may have one that has practically nothing in it, or some of you may just have very even across the board. So we're going to talk about dominant colors first, and then we'll talk about those of you who are more of a mix, okay? So here's a quote that we often start out with, and I don't know how you agree with this or not, but no such thing as a difficult person, only someone you don't know, understand, or appreciate the style by which they are communicating. Well, that would be a wonderful world to live in, wouldn't it? But I think there is a negative truth in there that we already jump to assumptions when we meet somebody. So, for instance, again, my example of somebody scowling, right? When I was working at the clinic, we had a physician, he was fairly new. He was very shy and he was also introverted. But he was a wonderful doctor. When he was alone with the patient, it was like they were the only two in the whole world. So he was great at what he did. But when he was outside of that exam room, his social skills were, shall we say, lacking. And he'd been there for a few months, and I started getting people coming into my office, particularly nurses who work more carefully with them, but saying, I don't think Dr. So-and-so likes me. And I'm like, why? Well, he doesn't talk to me, and he's always frowning at me. And like in the morning when I pass him in the hallway and I said, hi, he doesn't answer me. He just looks down and walks away. And I'm like, okay, but I'm hearing this from everybody, right? Well, I know this guy, I hired him. So I had a little chat with him and I said, anyway, I won't go into the whole chat, but basically what we ended up with, he was just so shy. He didn't know how to interact well with people. And he said, I don't really know what to say and what's appropriate. So I said, okay, don't say anything. Make quick eye contact and smile when someone addresses you. All you have to do. Let's do that first. Within a few days, people were coming in. Forget what I said about Dr. So-and-so. You know what? I think he really does like me after all. All he did was smile when people said hello. That's all he did. So who knows, right? Okay. Oh, go again, getting started. Okay, so there are some, based on some of the research, here's some stats for you. Most people have about, in a communication encounter, you got about 30 seconds together before I do my grocery list, whatever. And if you're lucky, I think this is a high number, but if you're lucky, they'll remember a fourth of what happened in the conversation. Now, but while we're communicating in one brief encounter, 15 to 20 signals that we're giving off. Right? So no wonder, like when you're in class, and you're taking notes, or your phone buzzes and your kids are trying to kill each other at home, that you, and then the instructor says, and that'll probably be on the test, you're like, oh, right. I was just absent for 5 seconds. So there are a few things I want you to keep in mind, and I will post these for you. And I have given credit to the actual trainer who put these together for us, so, and he has given me permission to share them, okay. So we want to think about behavior versus intention, okay? First of all, people are different and unique, which is a good thing, otherwise we'd be so bored. But because we're different and unique, differences can create tensions, so those are normal. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. So, and they can also be productive age or exchange of ideas. So, but how we interact, we have different preferences in how we do that. So it's our style of communicating that gets in the way. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to come up with a grid, and you'll see in the next slide, okay, that one of them is going to be whether or not you're more on the, we call it assertiveness, but it's more like asking versus telling. So somebody who's like super confident is going to walk in and share their idea right away. That doesn't mean they're bombastic. It just means this is who they are. Likewise, somebody who's very relationship oriented might start by saying, hey, how are your kids? Right? What'd you do this weekend? Right? That's asking. Then we have how much we use our emotions. Some people are very, guarded. Others are like, whatever. So those are our 2 dimensions. And then with that, so you can see the assertion part is the X, and the emotion part, how much we emotionally respond or not, engage in that part, is on the Y-axis. So then we come up with these 4 types of communication styles. Now, disclaimer, it's very rare that any one of us is just one of these, okay? So, bear with me as we talk about these different styles. Okay, so the upper right, we have that writing personality. Okay, that's our W. And then we have the expressive behavior. That is our red. Oh, whoops, on this red, X. Okay. And then we have our analytical and amiable, which is a relationship person. Okay. So I'm not sure, this is based on what a researcher who originally came up with this, so I'm not sure I would actually super agree with these terms, okay? So you've already done this, and you've already done that. All right, so let's take a look at these. All right, our first one, I already put this on the board, right? Now, what we've done is change those words from a researcher and put it in more common terms. So if you're down here in the lower part, you're very people oriented. If you're on the upper part, you're more task oriented, okay? And then if you're on the right side, you're like, get her done. If you're on the left side, the process itself is more important, and therefore there may be more involved in do it right instead of do it fast kind of thing. Okay, so none of these are good or bad. It's just what it is. Okay, so part of what we want to do is not just recognize who we are, but we want to be able to recognize other people and how they're communicating so that we can speak their color language, so to speak. Okay, so the first one, and I've never done this in a mask, so I have to wear some props, okay? So let's see how this goes. Is our brown color. Do we have any W's in here? Okay, Quinn? Is it a very W or do you have the second one that's?
Yeah, the second one's pretty close.
Okay, so when we get to the mixed ones, that'll make even more sense. Okay, the rest of you, no. Now, if this were a business class, we'd have a crap over you guys. Okay, just saying. All right, so here's some information on our Browns. So Browns are decision makers. So their attitude is make a decision now, right? We don't need to take in all of this, asking too many questions. We just get it done. And if it turns out to be the wrong decision, we have a new decision to make, right? So in terms of conflict, it's just a way of life. We're okay with it. So I'm speaking Brown right now, and I'm okay with conflict because it's just a great way to get new information and come up with new ideas. Typically, we are pretty good compartmentalizers. So that means we can set aside our emotions if we need to while we're taking in what somebody's saying over here. So good multitaskers. We don't often express our emotions unless we're angry. And we're getting pretty good at that. Pretty direct. Some people might call us blunt. Because remember, we're kind of a spectrum here. Not really into chit chat. Let's get to the point. So if you know somebody Brown, is truly Brown, you might hear the following phrases. Cut to the chase. Get to the bottom line. Just do it. And my favorite,
Hey, Phil.
no whining. Okay? Whining is not allowed. You might also hear things like, and your point is, so actions speak louder than words, right? Talk is cheap. All right, so let's see people throughout previous years, and we should really update this because it says people you might not even know. But these are people from recent history who are some Brown. So the woman on the right is Margaret Thatcher, in case you don't know. You probably recognize Steve Jobs. Right? Okay. So we're in pretty good company, right? All right.
I don't know why Phil Knight isn't on there. Just do it. Phil's not there.
Phil's not there. Well, maybe he'll be in our updated. Okay, so for each color, I'm going to give you a scenario. It's a person calling into 911. Now, I want you to recognize that this is a bit embellished to really get the point across on all of these, and we're also having a little bit of fun. So, operator, 911, what's your emergency? The Brown person. Guy swinging a machete. What's your location? Wind code. What's the address? Northeast 122nd. Do you know the cross street? No, just get over here now, or I'll take this guy out myself. Man, did you know this is a recorded line? Okay, all right. So those are our Brown folks. Which means because we're in the upper right quadrant, we're about getting things done. And we're about getting them done. Now, we're not reckless. We're not reckless. We just are expedient. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at our next one. Our reds. Do we have any X's in here?
It was my second.
Okay, good. All right, was it close to your first?
Fairly.
A little bit, okay. All right, so we'll see how it fits once you hear a little bit more about it, okay? My sister, the one in Seattle, is like a flaming red. I grew up in a family of reds, okay? I speak red really well, even though it's not my first, but okay, this style is fun-loving, creative, spontaneous, and they're risk takers. They like to be, life is exciting, and they see everything as creative and interesting, okay? Red communicators have no problems making decisions. they may make the direct opposite decision though 5 minutes later. Okay, whatever floats your boat. And this has caused some people to maybe think that they are a little bit flaky. So in terms of conflict, no problem. Not only do red communicators not mind conflict, they actually like it sometimes. It spices things up, okay? Reds often see easygoing and things, seem easygoing and things just roll off their backs, okay? They're great in a crisis. So good in a crisis that sometimes they've been accused of creating. They're spurt workers. So 90 miles an hour for a while, and then they stop and have fun. Very creative, intuitive, and spontaneous. They tend towards the hyperbole, exaggeration, right? It's a little more interesting. So if the story's boring, we'll just spice it up, right? Very nonlinear. So some of the things that you might hear from a red speaker, we might say, lighten up, take a chill pill, trust me, go with the flow, whatever. Okay, so here are some of our reds. Lady Gaga, Robin Williams, Martin Luther King Jr., which we often have very charismatic people here, right? So often our reds also don't like structure at all, okay? So here's our 911 call. 911, what's your emergency? Well, either we're all freaking dead or Halloween's come early. What's happening? Well, who the hell knows? I mean, there's this big hooking guy going all crazy ninja-like in the window. Well, come to think of it, this is Northeast Portland, and what is he doing? Besides his blood-curdling screams, he's got this machete and he's kind of lunging, sort of ADHD squared, if you get my meaning. Where's your location? Well, sorry, this is so my sister. I'm hiding in the wine section right now, getting ready to have some liquid courage. The red puts down the phone and picks up the ball. Ma'am, are you still there? Okay.
So I can see why that's my second, because yeah, some of them definitely fit, but others.
So if you think about a business meeting, okay, the Browns are going to come in, they're going to have an agenda. When we come in, we have an agenda. We're down to business, right? When the Reds come in, first of all, they probably could be late, but they're going to be treats or coffee or something for everybody because, we want to have fun. And it's okay to be fashionably late, particularly if you bring something fun to eat. And then they might turn it into some sort of game, like make party hats or something along the way. So our Reds are very fast moving, but they're also very people oriented. These are extremely charismatic people. I mean, these are your Pied Pipers, right? And what's not, yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Seems like the fast moving and the easygoing chill seem like they're opposites of each other.
Well, because so they're fast moving, but they're not worried about negatives. Usually these people are extremely bright, for one thing. We have a lot of entrepreneurs here. And so entrepreneurs will often, they're risk takers. They'll try and fail and try and fail. And it doesn't faze them. But they keep going after it, right? And so the thing is, you make a mistake, you just do something else. So that's the chill pill, right? Don't take yourself too seriously, right? Just have a little fun with it.
Never get out of line.
So growing up in a house full of Reds, I'm telling you, it was a hilariously fun experience. And I've already mentioned that I'm not a native Red speaker, but my immediate family, think I am really boring and quiet and shyish. That gives you any indication of the environment I grew up in, which meant sensory overload was a common thing that I had to learn to deal with. So hopefully your whole family isn't one color or another, right? Oh, I'm sorry. This is the best part of the reds, okay? This is how we might show up at a meeting or whatever.
Well, I did say I wanted to get a dinosaur costume.
There you go, right? We're gonna show up at, in costume on Halloween or whatever. And the thing is, the sad thing is sometimes they can be so bright and so engaging that their ideas are not often taken seriously because the flow of ideas can be really fast too, right? Okay. All right, so let's take a look at our blue folks. Okay. So how many Ys do we have in here?
That was my cool one.
Wow, I am surprised. All right,
Yeah.
okay, your color is blue. All right, so let's see a little bit about you guys.
We all knew we were getting a teddy bear. That's what.
A blue teddy bear. Okay, this style tends to express themselves in ways that are sensitive and caring. Blue communicators can read emotions and see how to relate to others really well. Their decisions are made based on people first and facts or tasks second. That doesn't mean they ignore the facts, but they're more likely to ask questions like, did you involve everybody? Did we get input, right? So that's that part of the process. And what about conflict? We don't like conflict. So we will do everything we can to avoid conflict and hug our teddy bears. So if we're hit with conflict, it is possible that we could even become more of a martyr persona in order to deal with it. So characteristics are very supportive, seek to please, right? They communicate emotions, right? So we allow people to see who we are and exchange so that they feel comfortable with us. Tend not to trust or disclose if we don't know somebody yet on a personal level. So that becomes very important that we can read that person. So I'm thinking that those of us who are speaking blue have higher emotional intelligence level, right? Because we're really tuned into that, which makes us good communicators and also makes us good leaders, except for other aspects. So some of the things we might hear, you might hear us speaking in blue is, well, how do you feel about this? What are your true feelings? Can't we just all get along? Right? Let's see how the others feel about this. Okay. So here are Oprah Winfrey, Paul McCartney, Cesar Chavez, Princess Di, Barbara Bush. Okay, Ellen, right? Okay. So let's see what our 911 call looks like. 911, what's your emergency? Hello, operator, how are you today? Ma'am, what's your emergency? Well, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. What's going on? This young man with a machete seems very upset now. He's kind of swinging it around. Maybe someone should talk with him to find out. Ma'am, what's your location? Oh gosh, it's a Winco, but this isn't my neighborhood. Let me go ask someone and then I'll call you right back. Remember, slight exaggerations here. Okay. So we don't have any greens in here as primary, right? Do we have anybody with a green that's second? Okay.
Tie for second, brown and green.
Okay, okay. Not a common one. Okay, this is never done this again with my mask on. So, and this is kind of wavy, so it's a little hard for me to see what I'm doing. So if I fall down, just okay, so remember our blues are big on process and people, right? That makes total sense. Okay, our green folks. Oops, let's go back. Okay. All right, so this style is values planning, thoroughness, and quality oriented. So the idea of gathering data and exchange of information and ideas is really important. And in fact, these are the folks where, you know, when you think of quality control, probably grew out of green speakers, right? Their green style communicators are often slow decision makers. They don't want to just make a decision, they want to make the right decision. So first they need facts, data, research, and analysis. So I should go back to blues in their meetings. Blues are going to show up. And if you're the meeting organizer, you're going to go around and ask everybody how their week was. Ask them about their families, their weekends, maybe break some bread together before you get down to business. Okay, so now our green speakers are, in terms of conflict, they tend to depersonalize conflict. So then it becomes, I need more information, right? This doesn't mean that they don't get hurt feelings. It just means that the way they deal with conflict is to say, I need more information, need more data, right? So something you might hear is, let me think about that. Okay, so they're going to process the conversation. So if we're speaking green, we might say, where's your data? What does the research say? What's the context? We need to learn from the mistakes of the past so we don't repeat them. So their characteristics are typically very perfectionist, which is why I often see it here at Oregon Tech, right? Can be literal in their language, and they're very prepared, but they can also be quite innovative, okay? So here are some of our green friends: David Letterman, Barack Obama, Leonardo da Vinci, Madame Curie, Bill Gates, Albert Einstein, George Bush Sr. Some pretty impressive people in this group, right? Okay. When a green speaker has a meeting, they're going to send out an agenda well in advance, probably with some supportive data for everybody to look at or things to read, so everyone comes prepared. And then there'll be discussion in there about this, and then a definitive process to go through to make a decision. There won't be any sharing of food or anything like that. All right, 911. 911, what's your emergency? Whether or not this is an actual emergency remains to be seen. It could be a theatrical stunt, a prank, or any number of, ma'am, what's your emergency? Well, approximately 12 feet north of the checkout stand number 3 in the frozen food aisle, there's a 20 to 30-year-old Caucasian male who appears to be about 6 feet tall, wearing a black cape and mask. He also has a machete in his left hand. He is making counterclockwise circular motions with the machete, which looks like a type of metal. He also has, ma'am, what store and location? Do you want the precise address, which I will have to Google, or do you want the cross streets or the main entrance or the side of the store? What's the name of the store and the cross streets? Let me double check. She starts walking out. Okay. All right. So I don't know how any of that rings true with you, but for our as green speakers, we're very interested in both process and task, which again, here with many of the disciplines that we work with, this makes a lot of sense. Okay, so here we are. Now, as mentioned, we are a unique blend of styles, okay? So here are some of the more common ones. So green and brown, was that what you mentioned? Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look. Because we're at the top, we're very task oriented. And so we tend to be a little bit more linear in how we unfold our data. We want to make sure that we're making the right decision, not just a quick decision. Very logical as opposed to and taking emotion out of it. Task force focused. And we're more likely to have that agenda with backup data available. Okay. Here's another combination. Was that you? No. Yeah, no, you guys were all very blue. Okay. Fastest of all the styles, because we got both over here on the expedient side, right? But the biggest risk takers, okay? More millionaires in this style and most bankruptcies with this style. There's totally fixed, right? Because you got your movers and shakers, just get it done, no whining, just do it. And then you got your inventor. Like, it's okay if we fail, try and fail, right? And have fun when you do it. Okay. Oh, I was gonna talk about myself, but I won't. Okay. So the next comment, and notice these are side by side. So they have one axis thing that's very much dominant. So here are blues and reds. Often we see this together because they're both very people oriented. So those two are, this is, okay, easiest of the styles to be seduced. And by seduced, we don't mean sexually. We mean taking in with an idea, right? Because ideas come from people and we're interested in people. And, you know, as a red, we're excited about ideas and we want to try them out. As a blue, if we've got to know this person, we want to trust them, okay? It's very people focused and tend to be quite emotional. So when they say wear your emotions on your sleeves, what we're meaning is that it's very obvious. So when I'm angry, you're gonna know it, right? When I'm happy, you're gonna know it too, okay? Inspirational, because this is a very charismatic group. These are people, right? These are people who know how to relate to people. So it's no surprise that they can inspire people to follow, okay? All right, the last one where we have our neighboring colors is green blue, which is very process oriented. Okay, it's the slowest of the styles because we want to make sure everybody's included and that we have all the data, okay? So that makes sense. It's very process, but also caring and thoughtful. So I taught with a gentleman at my last school who was an accounting professor, and his dominant color was green. So, and, okay, my dominant color is brown, right? And the students used to laugh at us and say, tortoise, hair on fire. That's how they describe this, almost like I was a red. But then you can understand because I'm very familiar with that language. And we were always butting heads because he's like, I need more information. And I finally figured out that I was pushing him into a very uncomfortable position because it made perfect sense to me. I'd done enough research, I'd come up with all the support, was laid out, was ready to go, let's just make it happen. And he wasn't comfortable with that. So I started sending him calendar and invites for meetings a week or two in advance. And then I would start feeding him information about it. And then a few days before the meeting, he got an agenda and he could have input, of course, on any of this. And if he needed a side meeting before our big meeting, I would do that so that he could process it. But the thing that made it work is we were both student focused. He really, really wanted to do, he was like, students adored him, which is not common for accountant necessarily. I mean, we've had some experience in accounting. They just loved him. He was like, he didn't have any kids of his own, and these are all his children. So that's where we came to a commonality, right? So they combined both logic and emotion, which was this guy completely. All right, so here we are. Now, notice again with the arrows, you can see that these are common because they have a lot in common. We call these cousin colors. But we also have some other combinations, okay? So the brown blue or the red green. And these are what we call learned styles, okay? So I'm probably a brown, red, blue. But I'm probably brown first, blue, red second, and red third. And the red's there because I just, you know, it's what I know. And I'm very low on the green scale, very low. So I have part of this learned style as well. So the thing that we want to do is, try not to just be aware of who you are, but try to recognize where other people are coming from. Because like I did with my accounting friend, I had to figure out how he was communicating with me. And then once I met him, he also learned to meet me partway. So it worked out much better. But we want to avoid stereotyping people, right? That's why you often hear me talk about speaking the red language. So let's say we go on a trip and we go to Berlin. Everyone's speaking German. I don't speak German, right? But I'm trying to communicate. So I got to figure out how to make that work. So it's similar here. Think of this as somebody's style is just different than yours. So how do we learn to communicate better with them, right? And these are not values. These are styles of communication. So we don't want to ascribe any personality characteristics to them. Like the reds are flaky, or the greens are, slower in molasses and they're, risk averse all the time, whatever. Or the blues only, they're just bleeding hearts, or they're just emotional, right? Yeah.
So when, we're talking about the learned styles, but also can't certain conditions like, contribute to, because, like if you're a blue red, but then let's say you have depression or you have certain medications that like affect
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. Right. And it can be a work setting as well. Or you may learn how to communicate differently because you're surrounded by people who are different as well. But yes, so we're going to talk just a teeny bit about what happens when we're stressed, because each of these colors has a negative side as well. Kind of that fight or flight thing that happens when somebody attacks us, either verbally or whatever. So yes, and in fact, I recommend that you should be fluent in all languages, all colors, right? So what happens if, okay, so I have red parents and I'm a brown, okay? So, this was a very stressful thing for somebody who likes things organized and getting done. We were always going on adventures, which most kids would love. At some point, that's like eating ice cream all the time instead of having anything else, So we want to be able to communicate with everybody successfully. All right, so we each have coping strategies. Don't take these personally. If we're brown, we are going for it. We're done listening to people. We're done with patients. We're going to tell you what it is because we're in charge. And if you don't do it, you're going to lose your job. Done. Okay. Now, if we're red, we get angry, we go right for the jugular. And we say nasty things about each other. Okay. It's a very personal attack. The blues, we get very passive aggressive and almost martyr-like, right? Waiting for somebody to recognize that we've been hurt. The green, if they're really stressed out, and let's say they're surrounded by a bunch of reds or browns, they may end up with analysis paralysis. And I saw that happen with my friend. When I got a little bit too crazy sometimes, and I would bring in other people who were a little bit more like me, and he would just not have it. So we want to know that this can be out there and watch for it, right? So that we don't go there. Okay, so what are your thoughts? What do you think?
I like having blues on my teams.
Yes.
They're a good team player, but then also they're completely willing to let me be in charge because they just want the group to cohese as well as possible. So it's like, okay, let's do this. And then a green as well,
Mhm.
to some extent.
Oh, yeah, they're gonna make sure you have the data to support what you're talking about.
Yeah, and reds can be a little dangerous because,
They are great in a
Yeah.
presentation.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So if you can wrangle them, then they're really good. But they could also, if they go off topic, then
Yeah.
they can be a liability.
Yeah, they're the ones that will walk up as you're lining up your presentation and say, I think this is a great idea, just roll with them. And they get up there and they say something completely off the reservation.
Mhm.
And you're next. You're like, hey. Yeah, no, you're right. But in the brainstorming session,
Yeah,
yeah, creative ideas. And everything is good. Everything is good, right? You're absolutely correct. So, in some of the MBA classes I've taught where I had to do teams, I usually do this first. And I do, I put one of each on every team if I have it. Now, unfortunately, in business school, we see a lot of browns or brown green. And so, getting that mix is a little harder, although blue is very common. And because oftentimes when you go to MBA school, you want to manage people. So people are of great interest to you. So that brown blue mix is pretty common. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great observation. Anything else?
Do you think people have a different kind of resting color and a different stress color?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
I've kind of seen that
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. Can you give an example maybe?
Well, let's say there's a, shit hits the fan, so to speak, sorry for the language.
Yeah, no problem.
People have to get the job done and they don't like you could be a blue resting and then, but if you understand, you gotta take control if you want the job to get done.
Mhm.
Wallow in the emotions of the situation.
Mhm.
Just go try to get the job done.
So I think if you have two colors that you are fairly strong for you, that would be more likely. And I'm thinking my poor sister, she knew what I was talking about. Well, she'll be fine. So she is a very large red. And, she, but also has a lot of brown. So like she's a professional mediator and facilitator, but she's also loves to present and entertain, right? But when she's in work mode, she's very brown. She's organized, getting it done, moving people along, particularly in mediation. But when she gets upset, she's total red. I mean, she goes from being very logical and direct and straightforward to being personal and mean. And I just learned over the years that, and then, here's the other thing that reds who do this, they get really personal. 10 minutes later, let's go out and have drinks. Let's go shoot hoops. Because to them, it's not really a big deal. They just needed to get rid of it. And they just got rid of it right on you. Yeah. So you're a puddle, you're like a mess, and they're like ready to move on. So, yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I've worked really hard at being able to speak better green because I have quite a bit of blue in me, right? So, and of course, red. Yeah. I just speak it well. I don't know that it is a natural color for me. So are you guys more mixed, do you think? Does anybody here have strong across the board or like 3 or 4 that are pretty even?
Not red is pretty much what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah. So you've got those 3, right?
I was more strongly in blue.
Uh-huh.
I had a lot of those, but the red was the second. But the green and the brown tied.
Interesting. Well, and the red is a people thing, which makes sense. It's common for blues to have a little bit of red in them because they're people oriented, right? Yeah, yeah. And that also, not that blues aren't intelligent, but the reds can have this hyper level of creativity and creative thought. So that's wonderful.
I feel like the parts of me that are red, like the spontaneous, fun-loving parts of me were more like, because as a kid, I was like that's part of me was like,
More suppressed?
yeah, like, because our family, several of them were very dominant brown, and they were like, very controlling and pressed that part of me down. And so I think then as an adult, I'm like, I just feel like,
Yeah. And with me, it could have been the opposite, where I needed some structure and organization, and I needed to see things get done. Like it'd be like, oh, do we have groceries in the house? I mean, but
I think that's why, because of the red, that I have to like sit there and write out my routines and do that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, I'm such a brown. I have lists. I have a main list for all my other lists that coordinates them. And I'm gonna cross it off my list thing.
Yep.
It's a very important thing to me.
But I have to force myself to do that, because as a red, I'm just gonna be like all over the
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. So my sister's like,
Yeah, hotness.
yeah, but so my sister's first marriage, she was married to a green, he was an attorney, super green. And he's the reason she actually has a successful business, because she wasn't really worried about paying bills and keeping track of the money and all that. She was out there getting clients and doing her business and, raking in stuff and being very successful. But the business part was falling apart. So he's, jumped in, got it taken care of. And then she realized how important that was. So they're divorced. So she hired somebody to do that for her.
Yes, my ex was a green and a brown. You can see that very clearly.
Yeah, very different personality type from me. Yeah. Opposites attract. Okay, why don't we take about 5 minutes? Let's come back. We'll talk a little bit about leadership, and then you guys can be on your way. So I have some of these cards that I'll set out. If you're interested in, the front has some of the characteristics that were on your list. And then the back, that how you signal people and some of the language things that I mentioned. So I'll just set them up here. Let me take a look if you want. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a few minutes.
Yeah, so thinking about it, I'm a brown because I just kind of want to get the work done. Then my dad is a green because he wants.
All right. So leadership. What do you guys think of when you think of leadership? Just toss out some ideas, whether it's words or phrases or definition. What? What do you think?
Servant.
Servant.
Something who's tasked with organizing a group of people for a specific purpose.
Good. Good.
Someone that just takes control.
That way
Takes control.
takes control. Yeah.
Responsibility.
Responsibility.
Director.
Director. All of these are part of it. Yes. Anything else? Okay. Well, for my leadership classes, I usually divide people up into groups, and I've tasked each group with coming up with a definition. And I can tell you that every time they're all different. And leadership is leadership is one of those things that we know when we see it, but it's hard to put it in, to articulate exactly what we need, because it's complicated sometimes. But we're in good company because there is no one accepted definition among scholars, practitioners, or in the research. After all these decades of research, there is no one accepted definition. There are some definitions that have certain things in common, and it's changed over the years as our societies changed, companies have changed, work has changed, and our knowledge has changed, right? Okay. Okay. Well, we didn't want to do that. Let's see the maps. Oh, there she is. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, we can break down, leadership a couple of ways. So we can break it down in, categories of type. And if we look at these classifications, they follow a historical timeline. Okay, so that's usually how I like to introduce it. The first one on the left is trait leadership. That's where, we look at characteristics that people have that make them good leaders, etc. So trait theories were some of the early leadership theories that both practice.
Great man thing.
Yes, the great man theory is part of this. And the idea was, okay, so when you think about the Industrial Revolution, remember we had management science that developed and all that, and that worked really well as people moved into factories and we figured out that they did well and timed them and put them in the tasks they excelled at. And then we noticed that there was a drop off. So productivity soared, leveled off, and then it started to plummet. Because number one, people were bored, they were sick, they were injured, and they were motivated. So then this idea came about, which is kind of interesting, that maybe people are not like machines, maybe there's this other factor. So this is the study of leadership was born. So nobody knew what that was. So they thought, okay, let's look at history and let's identify in today and before people that we would consider exemplary leaders. And then let's analyze their characteristics. We'll come up with a recipe and then we'll hire those people. I think that's a great idea. But it didn't really work because if you think about leaders through history, there are more differences than there are similarities. Now, there are some similarities across many exemplary leaders. And so those are things that we can identify, things like integrity and honesty and that sort of thing. So, but the thinking was you were born as a leader. So they looked for the great man, great person theory, which is we find people with the right stuff and that's the right person. So these are some characteristics that came to the surface, right? I'm not sure if I have, let me see if I have my list. Okay, so you can see here that, and then the left, when you look at traits, they kind of combine different things. Like you can see honesty, integrity, trustworthiness, all of that is kind of all together. So they try to find groups, clusters, right? So Kuz and Posner have been around for 3 decades doing research. They're very, they're probably one of the most read, they write the most textbooks. And they've been doing longitudinal and cross-sectional studies for 30 years. And over the years, they continue to go into workplaces and organizations and ask people who are followers or people who are employees, what is the most important characteristic to you of the person in charge, of your leader? If you could ask them, if you could choose only one characteristic for them to have, what would that be? Anybody want to guess what that was?
For
Number one
leaders?
characteristic, which is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
For leaders? I think Curtis is.
Servant leadership? So servant leadership has about 10 main characteristics underneath it, okay? So if we were gonna pick one of those, so think of, what you might think about is what is most often missing among our leaders, right? That's what people like. Okay,
I like responsiveness.
number one characteristic across the ages, over 30 years, across cultures. Honesty and integrity, number one. honesty and integrity. So these are the top 20 that seem to keep floating up in the research over and over and over and over again. And they have tens of thousands of participants. So this is pretty good data. And it is supported by other data as well. But this is their list. So, and I'm sure it's changed slightly because forward-looking probably wasn't as important in 1970 as it is today, right? So all of these things rolled in, right? But it does kind of make you wonder, wow, I have to be all these things? No, you don't have to be all these things. You need to be you. But these are important characteristics, right? And that's why I said, if you look at, people from history, like Lincoln or Gandhi, or somebody out of business, right? You're going to find different characteristics. All of them may have something in common, but you're going to find extroverts and introverts. You don't have to be charismatic and an extrovert to be a leader. Okay, that is something that we've come to realize in recent years. So over the years, studying this, they couldn't come up with this cool recipe, right? So then they thought, maybe it's not just who they are, maybe it's what they do. So the behavioralists came along around the 1980s and said, okay, maybe it's, we need to figure out how they interact with followers. So a bunch of survey leadership studies, and what they found was that leaders had two main areas of responsibility: tasks, getting it done, reaching the goal, and relationships, inspiring people to follow, right? So that there were these two sides. Now, oftentimes, many people are one or the other, but we want to find somebody that does both well, okay? So you can see that we also, the literature, when you read through it, talks about the relationship is person-oriented, or they call it consideration of others. And then in the scholarly literature, you'll see initiating instruction, that just means task-oriented, okay? So we want both. And you can see after our conversation on communication that we don't always follow neatly in those categories where we have both well developed. So if we're stronger on one side than the other, what are we going to do? Okay, we're leading. So I'm a task-oriented person. So how, and I have some good relationship stuff, but how am I going to make my leadership better? Can you think of something I might be able to do if I'm in charge?
To make a point to work on your weak point.
Yeah, absolutely. And although, because it doesn't come naturally, I don't want to spend too much time over there because I've got a ceiling, right? So I'm going to bring in members of my team that are strong in this, right? So it's like, Quinn was saying on his team, he definitely wants a blue person because that's a relationship person. They're going to bring us together, right? So if I'm task oriented, I want to make sure I have relationship people who can really step forward when needed. And then the next one is what we call the contingency leadership model, because although we learned a lot through behavior, our studies showed there was still this huge missing element that we weren't capturing, okay? So then we thought, okay, well, maybe it's contingent on the situation and the people who are leading, right? So if we're leading people who are doing very simple tasks with very little education, we might lead in a different manner than if we're overseeing research scientists who are in their labs with all of this education, creating, or artists, right? We're going to lead differently. So that became contingent on the situation and the people who we're leading. So this involves also this skill of this relationship part, right? Of understanding people and what's needed and what's not needed. And again, you're going to hear, when you read about leadership, there's a lot of talk about emotional intelligence. And your book mentions, I can't remember which chapter they mention it in, But it's about recognizing your own emotions and those of others and figuring out how to communicate and make that work. So you can see the bottom bullet here is that people, leaders who have good relations have more influence. So leadership is about influencing others, right? Because as Ben said, we want to have people follow us in getting towards a goal, right? So if we're antisocial, no one's following us, they don't care. People respond to emotional pull, right? So sometimes we don't know why we're following this person. And that's where that charismatic thing comes in, this mystical thing. But we do it because we're excited. Now, it doesn't hurt if you have a really important, passionate goal. But if you're, as a leader, passionate about that goal, that's an emotion, right? So leaders who are very task-oriented tend to do better in more structured environments. So the first one I mentioned, which is say you're in a manufacturing plant and the people that you work with, so maybe you're in China and it's an assembly line and they don't speak a lot of English and the education is low and they're doing repetitive work over and over and over again. Okay, you're going to add more structure, it's going to be more task-oriented. And they're going to need that and want that, okay? So Tannenbaum and Schmidt came up with this continuum. And so in their studies, as have others, but this shows how we can adjust from how structured and I don't want to use the word controlling, but more telling than asking, okay? On the autocratic side, which is where you have those structured things, or safety is really, really important, and you have to be very structured. Then you go all the way over here to the participative side, and these would be people who are, where your followers are self-motivated, and they're there for a cause. They're not there for a money or for anything else. The purpose is greater than anything else, or maybe they're learners, right? You get a bunch of people who just want to learn and explore or discover, right? Find something new, who are curious. You do not want to micromanage them. Okay, that is the worst thing possible. So how, you know, you can see from the definitions that we have different levels of how we interact. So I'm going to suggest that before we move on to the last step, which is integrating all this and then getting a little bit more into the weeds, that we go ahead and stop here. I don't know if you guys have even had a chance to read this part in your book yet. So everything I've given you, I brought from different sources, but it's going to be very similar to what you're reading, okay? But I think it will help if you can get a little bit more into the reading as we move on, okay? Do you have any questions or comments about this? Or thoughts about, so think about, before we stop, think about somebody in your mind that when you think of a leader that you might want to emulate, whether you know that person or not, whether that person's alive or not, okay? So somebody, when you think of a leader, what comes into your head? Okay, hold that image. Can be, you know, historical figure, can be an athlete, can be a teacher, can be a parent or a family member, can be somebody you knew, right? So, given that, why did you feel that way? What happened? What happened that you tagged that person as somebody you wanted to follow?
They were inspiring in some way to you, and you completed your goal. It was what you set out to do. Maybe it was hard to do, and you didn't know if you could do it, and that leader helped you.
It's I call it connectivity, where you connect on this sort of higher level of purpose, right? And sometimes the leader pushes you out to lead as you're doing it and completing it, right? And the sign of a really excellent leader is somebody who creates other leaders. Yeah, that's part of servant leadership. Anybody else?
Someone that's gonna be a mentor is basically what.
Yeah, a mentor or coach can be really, really important. Because again, we feel valued, we feel worthy, we feel, and somebody cares. And humans are social creatures. It is really important to us that we connect with other humans. And this goes back to this connectivity thing, right? So leadership is not a solo sport. It's not somebody who sits in a tower. It's not the Wizard of Oz, right? Behind the screen with the big speakers who knows all and tells you the answer. That's not it. So, yeah. Anybody else?
Like someone that sets a good example.
Leading by example, absolutely. We don't see a lot of that in particularly corporate America. And some people will say, I talk about this in ethics class where in my business school, I used to hear all the time, ethics is okay as long as it's not it doesn't get in the way of profits. So people at work may talk about being, running an ethical company, but they personally may not be acting that way, right? Like my Enron thing. So I was telling my ethics class that I have their code of conduct and ethics book. And so it mirrors what they had on their website. And it was all about how ethical and upstanding and other-centered the company was. At the same time as they were stealing and, destroying other companies and that kind of thing. So, yes, we need to be authentic. Is another word for that, right? Good. Okay, let's take a look at Canvas here and see if you have any questions. I think this week is a pretty calm week. Okay, so we're going to do our cross-cultural activity next week. So here are some TED Talks on leadership. I highly recommend these, okay? So Simon Sinek is very well known. This is his quintessential leadership talk. He's very engaging. It'll go by quickly. If you're interested in all leadership, you need to hear this. Stanley McChrystal is from the military. He's retired. And he starts out by he's talking to his troops. He was a paratrooper. And he's talking to these young kids who are the recruits that have, joined his unit. And they're in Afghanistan or Iraq, I can't remember which one. And he's talking about 9/11, and he sees these kind of blank faces. And he said, son, where were you during 9/11? Sir, I was in the 3rd grade, And then he goes on and talks. So it's an interesting viewpoint. He's written a book and that kind of thing. So there are some others. This one I love by Drew Dudley. Yeah. I show this sometimes in presentation class. It's only about 7 or 8 minutes long. He tells this enormously hysterical story with a surprise ending. And he talks really fast, so don't speed it up. And it's called Everyday Leadership. How sometimes the tiniest things are what make a difference in someone's life. And like in leadership class, I have the students do a journal where they're looking for leadership on the street. Like the person in the grocery line that helped somebody behind them, or somebody who bought somebody's coffee behind them, or somebody who did just the opposite, right? Lack of leadership, lack of opportunity. So he takes it to this level where we no longer have to be like Superman and wear a cape and be other world-like. We're not superheroes, we're just people. So anyway, highly recommend those, worth your time. Okay, so that is all I have for you. You have another assignment. And that is it. So it's a case about United Airlines, which is kind of interesting. Poor United Airlines, they have so many problems. They're really good for case studies on all kinds of things. All right, I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna let you guys go, unless you have questions.
So this is about when they pulled that doctor off the plane, probably.
I'm trying to remember, because I use the United also in one of my other ethics classes. Could be. So there's, I should probably put a link up. There's a wonderful YouTube video on a band that was traveling on United, and they boarded the plane. They're on their way to a gig in Chicago, and they look out the window, and the baggage handlers are tossing their guitars to each other, and they're crashing and landing and all this. And for a year, they tried to get help and some sort of recourse, and it didn't. So he made a song, and it went viral immediately. And yeah, anyway, poor United.
Yeah, it's about the guy, the doctor guy.
Yeah. It's called United Breaks Guitars. All right, well, thank you for